it's Miss Cheka. I'm sorry that I am late. I lost track of time just a little bit. But I'm here to do Esperanza Rising with you. I'm also, let's see here. I also can tell from social media that it is the first day of school for several of you, which is super exciting. Some of you guys started school last week. Some of you are starting now. I don't start for 2 weeks. So the teachers go back next week and we're going to like plan and make lesson plans, do activities, and then students start after that. So I have a while. So anyway, if you have already started school, then woohoo, I bet it's weird, but I bet you're also kind of excited about it. I know we had some days off from Nerd Hangout, but we're back. I was a little bit under the weather, but I'm okay now, as you can see. I hope you were really good while I was gone. So when we left off, we had big changes for Esperanza because she was moving, and not just moving, escaping from her house in the wagon. So it was kind of a very exciting part. And of course, they had to escape in the wagon from Tio Luis, who burned down her family's vineyard. And they're going off to a new life in the U.S. And I think where we left off, the sisters at the convent had papers for them. All right. So we're going to get in here. Oh, that's right. I forgot that last week when we were reading, Esperanza told us of this wonderful memory that she had of going with her dad and Miguel on a really fancy train trip where they had like the beautiful, private train compartment, which like, that is my dream, to go in an old fashioned, like, a train like that. And also that they ate in the dining car, which like I have been in train dining cars and it is really legit, a neat experience. If you ever get to like take a long train trip, you get to go to the dining car. It's really neat. So that was her first memory of this is how you ride, on the train. But this time around, I mean, they are with like the chickens and the goats, right? And for a kid like her who's grown up pretty wealthy, this is a big adjustment. Okay. So here we go. The train pulled out and settled into a steady motion. Hortensia and Mama took out their crocheting. Mama was using a small hook and white cotton thread to make carpetas, lace doilies, to put under a lamp or a vase. She held up her work to Esperanza and smiled. Would you like to learn? Esperanza shook her head. Why did Mama bother crocheting lace? They had no vases or lámparas to put on top of them. By the way, lámpara is just lamp. Esperanza leaned her head against the window. She knew she did not belong here. She was Esperanza Ortega from El Rancho de las Rosas. She crossed her arms tight and stared out the window. For hours, Esperanza watched the undulating land pass in front of her. Everything seemed to remind her of what she had left behind. The nopales reminded her of Abuelita, who loved to eat the prickly pear cactus, sliced and soaked in vinegar and oil. The dogs from small villages that barked and ran after the train reminded her of Marisol, whose dog, Capitan, chased after trains the same way. And every time Esperanza saw a shrine decorated with crosses, flowers, and miniature statues of saints next to the rails, she couldn't help but wonder if it had been someone's father who had died on the tracks, and if somewhere there was another girl who missed him too. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second because there's wonderful vocabulary in this paragraph. First of all, nopales is a word that you have learned in Nerd Hangout because it's a prickly pear cactus. And you know that I have 2 prickly pear cactus. Remember the one with the little arms? Maybe this week we will go in the backyard and see some. But anyway, a nopal is a prickly pear cactus. Nopales. And I'm emphasizing that because if you live in Texas, there are a lot of things that are named after it. And you can eat them. So maybe in your grocery store, you might see Nopal, a whole section of the nopal leaves or pads, and people eat them. And you can eat like the little flower, the tuna. The other word that I really liked here that's vocabulary is undulate. Undulate. So first of all, so an undulating line is a wavy line. So it's a beautiful word because the word kind of sounds wavy, doesn't it? Undulate. But the other reason that I like this word so much is that if you're ever in a moving vehicle, like a car, but like especially like a train, even though it feels like you were sitting still, sometimes the window can almost feel animated, right? So when this sentence says the undulating land past her, it gives us a feeling of motion because we know that it's not the land that's moving, it's her because she's in the train. But it also gives us a sense that like if the landscape that she's looking at looks wavy, looks undulating like this, she must be looking at mountains or hills, right? Like rolling hills. So it's a word that evokes a picture in our mind of hills or mountains without actually spelling it out. So anyway, I just really like that line. You can have a straight line, you can have an undulating line. Esperanza opened her valise to check on the doll, lifting it out and straightening her clothes. The barefoot peasant girl ran over. "Mama," she said, and reached up to jerk the doll. Esperanza quickly jerked it away and put it back in the valise, covering it with the old clothes. "Mona, Mona," said the little girl, running back to her mother, which just means doll, doll. And then she began to cry. Mama and Hortensia both stopped their needles and stared at Esperanza. Mama looked across at the girl's mother. "I am sorry for my daughter's bad manners." Esperanza looked at Mama in surprise. Why was she apologizing to these people? She and Mama shouldn't even be sitting in this car. Hortensia looked from one to the other and excused herself. "I think I will find Alfonso and Miguel and see if they brought tortillas at the station." Mama looked at Esperanza. "I don't think it would have hurt to let her hold it for a few minutes." "But Mama, she is poor and dirty," said Esperanza. But Mama interrupted. "When you scorn these people, you scorn Miguel, Hortensia, and Alfonso. And you embarrass me and yourself. As difficult as it is to accept, our lives are different now." The child kept crying. Her face was so dirty that her tears washed clean streaks down her cheeks. Esperanza suddenly felt ashamed, and the color rose in her face, but she still pushed the valise further under the seat with her feet and turned her body away from Mama. Esperanza tried not to look back at the little girl, but she couldn't help it. She wished she could tell the little girl's mother that she had always given her old toys away to the orphanage, but that this doll was special. Besides, the child would have soiled it with her hands. Mama reached in her bag and pulled out a ball of blanket yarn. "Esperanza, hold out your arms for me." She raised her eyebrows and nodded toward the girl. Esperanza knew exactly what Mama intended to do. They had done it many times before. Mama wrapped the yarn around Esperanza's outstretched hands about 50 times until they were covered. Then she slipped a string of yarn through the middle of the loops and tied a tight knot before Esperanza removed her hands. A few inches below the knot, Mama tied another snug knot around all the yarn, forming a head. Then she cut the bottom loops, separating the strands into sections, and braided each section into what looked like arms and legs. She held the yarn doll up, offering it to the little girl. She ran to Mama, smiling, took the doll, and ran back to her own mother's side. The mother whispered into the girl's ear. Shyly, she said, "Gracias, thank you." "De nada, you're welcome," said Mama. The mother and the children got off the train at the next stop. Esperanza watched the little girl stop in front of their window, wave to Mama, and smile again. Before she walked away, she made the yarn doll wave too. Esperanza was glad the girl got off the train and took the silly yarn doll with her. Otherwise, she would have been reminded of her own selfishness and Mama's disapproval for miles to come. So I think we should stop and talk about this a little bit because, well, we've already discussed this. Esperanza is a little bit of a snob, right? She's a little bit of a snob. She is a kid who is experiencing true suffering right now. Like, her dad was killed, her house is burned down, she's had to escape in the middle of the night. So she is genuinely going through a very difficult time and genuinely is suffering. Like, bad things are happening in her life. But she also is a kid who has had a ton of privilege, like a ton of privilege. And those two things are not the same, are they? You can be somebody who has a lot of privilege and somebody who goes through tough things, right? So the kinds of privileges that Esperanza has had, that her friend Miguel has not had, that this little girl on the train has not had, is, first of all, like economic. Like, her family has had money. And we've seen that in 1,000 different ways in this book. Her family had money for the vineyard. Her family had money for servants. Her family had money to do like the manual labor on the vineyard. She has always had really nice things and extra things. So we know that, like, not only has she always had toys, but she's even given away her toys, to the orphanage, she just said. She always has like pretty dresses. She gets a huge party for her birthday. And she's also like kind of an only child. So she's like the princess of the vineyard, right? So those are privileges that she has had. And also, up until this point, she's a little spoiled, right? So that's not terrible, but it's true. She has two parents who just totally adore her, and servants who totally adore her. So Esperanza has had a lot of privilege, is suffering a lot, and that doll is special to her. Do you remember why that doll is special to her? Is it's not just any old doll. That is the last doll that her dad ever gave her. And that was going to be her special doll for her birthday. So we can understand that, like, that doll is very precious to her. Maybe that doll makes her think about her dad and how much he loved her and her birthday. So that's where she's at, right? Like, this is my special doll. Of course I want to protect it. Of course I don't want to share it. Of course I don't want to whatever, But her mom is seeing something different. Her mom is embarrassed by how Esperanza is acting, right? Because even though they have been through all these things, that little girl is not privileged, right? Her face is dirty. She's very poor. She doesn't have toys. She doesn't have dolls. And so the way that her mom sees it is, you have so much, even though we've lost a lot, the little that we have is more than that kid has. And you didn't have to give her your doll, but you could have shared the doll. So she's embarrassed at the way that her daughter is acting, like kind of selfishly. And I think that it's really interesting that, like, she doesn't make Esperanza give away her doll, but she makes a yarn doll for the other little girl. Right. And then she points out, I'm going to repeat what she points out here. When you scorn them. So scorn means like, ew, you're so poor. You're so dirty. Ugh. Like, when you act like that towards them, you are insulting our friends here. Because notice that when Esperanza acted like that, who left right away? Hortensia left right away. Alfonso left right away. Right? Because for Alfonso and Hortensia and Miguel, sitting in this train section, this isn't like, oh no, disasters happen. That's just their normal train section. They don't have a lot of money. So that's the mom's other thing, is like, you think that you're insulting just that family, but actually you're insulting our friends. It's not a very nice characteristic, is it? So, anyway, I think that was worth talking about, because I get Esperanza, but she knows that she could act a little better. She knows that she could act a little better. And we know that because she feels like embarrassed and uncomfortable, right? But I think she's a really good mom. Okay. Click-a-da, click-a-da, click-a-da. The song of the locomotive was monotonous. That means making one tone, boring, as they traveled north, and the hours seemed like Mama's never-ending ball of thread unwinding in front of them. Each morning, the sun peeked over one spur of the Sierra Madre, which is a mountain range, sometimes shining through the pine trees. In the evening, it set on the left, sinking behind another peak and leaving pink clouds and purple mountains against the darkening sky. When people got on and off, Esperanza and the others changed their seats. When the car filled up, they sometimes stood. When the car was less crowded, they put their valises under their heads and tried to sleep on the benches. At every stop, Miguel and Alfonso hurried off the train with the package. From the window, Esperanza watched them go to a water trough, unwrap an oilcloth, and dampen the bundle inside. Then they would wrap it in the oilcloth again, board the train, and put it carefully back into Alfonso's bag. "What is in there?" Esperanza finally asked Alfonso as the train pulled away from yet another station. "You will see when we get there." He smiled with a knowing look, and a knowing look passed between him and Miguel. Esperanza was annoyed with Alfonso for taking the package on and off the train without telling her what was inside. She was tired of Hortensia's humming and weary of watching Mama crochet as if nothing unusual were happening to them. But most of all, she was bored with Miguel's constant talk about trains. He chatted with the conductors, he got off at every stop and watched the engineers. He studied the train schedule and wanted to report it all to Esperanza. He seemed as happy as Esperanza was miserable. "When I get to California, I am going to work for the railroad," said Miguel, looking anxiously toward the horizon. They had spread pieces of brown paper in their laps and were eating pepinos, cucumbers sprinkled with salt and ground chiles. "I'm thirsty. Are they selling juice in the other car?" "I would have worked at the railroad in Mexico," continued Miguel, as if Esperanza had not tried to change the subject. "But it is not easy to get a job in Mexico. You need una palanca, a lever, to get a job at the railroads. I had no connections, but your father did. Since I was a small boy, he gave me his word that he would help me, and he would have kept his promise. He always kept his promises to me." At the mention of Papa, Esperanza felt that sinking feeling again. She looked at Miguel. He quickly turned his head away from her and looked hard out the window, but she saw that his eyes were damp. She never thought about how much her papa must have meant to Miguel. It dawned on her that even though Miguel was a servant, Papa may have thought of him as the son he never had. But Papa's influence was gone. What would happen to Miguel's dreams now? And in the United States? Well, I hear that in the United States, you do not need una palanca, that even the poorest man can become rich if he works hard enough. Okay, I know that it's a little early, but we're actually going to wrap up for today. I think this is a really good section because they're on a long journey and their life is going to be different at the end of it, huh? So anyway, if it is your first day of school, I'm very, very excited for you. If you're still waiting like me, I'm nervous for us. Anyway, I will see you tomorrow, 1:00. And in the meantime, eat your fruits and vegetables. And I see it's Christian Alexander. Bye, Christian.